Hello, welcome to day 12. Today we are painting a poinsettia. There are different types of poinsettias, and there's obviously the traditional red, which we're going to paint today just because I think it's the most simple, it's easy, it's recognizable. You can also paint white poinsettias, and I've seen some where they're like more of a pink and they're kind of like a mix with a little bit of the red and the white. But I want to keep this simple and easy and hopefully quick. So we're just going to do the traditional red. You are welcome to change yours up, paint it however you want. Remember, if you're painting white, you're actually painting more of the shadows and not the actual flower petals, the white part. The paper is white, and so you would leave the brightest parts white of the paper, and you would add in shadows to create the shapes of the poinsettia. And maybe we'll do some more things where we paint a little bit more in white later, but for now, we're just going to do the red. And so I'm going to use my cadmium red medium for the main color. I'll use some Perylene green for my leaves. This is also the Perylene green here. And we can maybe mix in a few other colors. We'll use some of the Quinacridone gold for the yellow bits in the middle. And then we'll just add some shadows and things build up that way. So no sketch for this one. We're just going to pick a brush and get started. I'm going to use my round 4 Princeton brush. Oops, just dropped that. I want to make sure that we can do a decent petal when we press with it and try to get like 1 or 2 stroke petals. Too big, what might fill up our page. Too fast, too small would take way too many strokes. So just something to be aware of. Pick whatever works best for you. I'm going to spray my palette, get these paints activated a bit before we get started. And then we will go ahead and kind of get started. I'm looking at a reference photo that just has kind of like, it just has one poinsettia. We can either paint straight in the middle one. You could paint off to the side, maybe put 2 together. They don't need to be perfect. Petals come in different shapes and sizes, so we can kind of play with it a bit. So let me get some of that cadmium red. I'm mixing it here where I had some of that darker red mix from a previous painting. Using the Perylene green to mute the red, but I'm going to put enough cadmium red straight from here in there that it's really not going to make a difference. I'm going to get some water in there because I want it to be a lighter value for our base layer, and then we'll build up to a darker values for our shadows. So nice and wet wash here. Nice puddle of the paint there. All right, I'm going to take it. We want to leave some space in the middle for just the center of the flower, the round yellow bits, and then there's some shadow underneath there. The poinsettia leaves do not go all the way. The petals do not go all the way to the center. So just something to be mindful of as we're painting this. We're just going to start. They're kind of a leaf shape. I'm going to press down and curl up and out. And go to a point there at the end. And I'm just going to kind of come around and just leave a space and build up to it. I want to come to a point each time. Poinsettia leaves kind of overlap. I am kind of bouncing around a bit so that we can then layer on top of them after these ones have dried. And I think that's going to be the best way to get that layered effect. I'm actually going to add one in here. Now I'm just kind of wiggling my brush around to get the different shapes, and I'm gonna go ahead. These ones actually probably should have already overlapped a little bit, but I think I have room. So I'm just gonna Add that in, and then we'll go in a minute and we'll add some petals behind these. Or rather overlapping. It depends on how you want to do it. We can either use a smaller brush and kind of paint the petals behind the ones we just painted, or we can let these dry, get a bit darker of a paint, and then we can just paint over these. And it just kind of depends. If we go dark enough, it shouldn't matter. If we're painting, because for watercolor is transparent, we go over these with another one, you might be able to see both layers of the leaves, petals, through the wash. And depending on what type of flower you're painting, that may not be an effect you're going for. There is a style where you do that, you overlap them, and you let them show through on purpose. But with poinsettias, if we're trying to paint this in a somewhat realistic style, you won't be able to see the other petals through the petals that are on top. And so we want to make sure if we're painting on top of them that we're going a good bit darker with our next one. And I think just for the fun of it, maybe we'll try 2 different types, and I'll paint 2 flowers just to see what we like best. And then we're also putting 2 on here. So let me go ahead and paint another flower. I'm just starting somewhere near the center there, pressing my brush down and then lifting up to a point. If we don't like the shape, we can always come back and add some to shape it out. Make them a little thicker. It depends on the brush type and stuff sometimes on how well it works to do a single brush stroke and get those leaves in there, for those petals to look nice in one stroke. It's got to have a really good belly of the brush. I really like how my Perylene Bright brushes do with this style, but they're a little big for this tiny paper that we're painting on. And so for that reason, I am just waiting a bit, or not using that for these specific paintings. But if I was painting a bit larger, I might use some of my bigger ones, especially if I was painting on a really large piece of paper. I have this really nice, really big one, and that would be fun to play with and to chew some of those petals and see how it works out. But right now on this smaller one, we gotta go small. So I'm just gonna pause my video for a minute and let this dry, and then we'll come back to it and we'll work on both of those. We'll do one where we paint over the petals, and then one where we paint kind of behind the ones that we've already painted. And we can see which one we prefer, or if there's not much of a difference, and go from there. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause. I will be right back. You can go ahead and pause yours, let your painting dry completely. This one's already almost, I mean, it still needs to dry a bit more, but it's definitely much more dry than this. But we're gonna give them time to both kind of catch up and get rid of some of that sheen that tells us that the paper is wet. And I will be right back. All right, I am back, and my poinsettia leaves here are dry. So we can go ahead and try the next section. I will say, just based on these and how they turned out, this one is much darker. So I think it would be harder to paint the leaves on top of those ones. So this one's the one I'm going to do the leaves behind. And so that might be something too when you're painting. Instead of going in with a plan, sometimes you kind of got to go with how it's turning out and adjust your plan to what's going to work best with what you have on your paper. So this one, I could try to paint over the top of these with do the leaves on top, but they're going to have to be even darker. And it's going to make my poinsettias really, really dark. And if that's the color and style you're going for, that's fine. So it's entirely up to you. But for my sake, I'm going to go over top on this one, and I'm going to paint kind of around and behind these ones. So we'll start with this one here. Just because it's easier, and as I go, I don't want to paint. That's the other thing when you're painting. Sometimes it's good to think of, where your hand is going to be, and if you can, you want to paint in the opposite direction. Start on the opposite side from where your dominant hand is. so you're not sticking your hand into the paint. I've done that many times when I don't think that through, and it can be tricky. So I'm going to grab some more of the cadmium medium here, and I'm going to do the same thing we did before. I'm just going to start with some newer leaves, and I'm just going to go right over top of these and bring it to a point. Some of them are going to be bigger, some are going to be smaller. That one actually probably went a little too far into the middle there because I don't want to cover this middle section here. And we also want to kind of wiggle them a bit. So that they're facing different directions, doing different things. The leaves should not all be symmetrical. That isn't realistic at all. And then this one here, I'm just going to paint a nice little leaf. I've seen some poinsettias where they have a small leaf, and then we can paint some more behind it in a bit after that's gone. And then at the bottom, we will do our leaves. Okay. Now for this one, because we're going to paint behind, you can try to use this brush if this works for you. You could also switch to your liner to have a smaller brush to have a little bit more control over where the paint is going. So I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to kind of start up here and give myself a little wiggle. And I'm just going to fill in that space between, and we'll eventually add in some shadows on these leaves, on all of them really, even those ones we just did, to give a little more definition and make it a little more realistic. So for now we're just trying to fill them in underneath that there. Yeah, and they can come in different points. We just want to fill in all of that leaf. I keep saying leaf. Petal. These are petals. The leaves will be green. They look a lot like leaves, so it can be a little confusing sometimes. But these are definitely flower petals. Okay. This one I will have be a little more curved. Just want to have some variation in the shapes of your leaves. And with kind of like where they meet up, like this one, I'm probably going to make it go a little more sideways here, and I'll probably actually, after this dries, squeeze in another one right there. Because they're not always exact, they don't always have exactly like 5 leaves and then 5 leaves, and then they overlap a lot. These are more symmetrical probably than an actual poinsettia would be. And actually in some of these I've got some really tiny ones like right here, and I'm gonna go ahead and add it just because it goes right over that one. And there's just a really tiny leaf there, and then there's another one on another side here. Now that'll be harder to do over here, especially if this doesn't dry very dark. We've got it really, really dark, but I wanted to make sure it would cover these. And then that's when we'll be able to take a look and see which of these we like more and which one we don't. And you can stick with the same method every time or change it up a little bit. It doesn't matter. The other thing we can do is on these ones that are dry, we could start doing some of the veining carefully. We don't want to bump into the other one, the ones that are wet. However, it won't matter as much because we're using the same colors. And if it blends in a little bit, it wouldn't be a big deal, but we still want to try to keep those separate. And so I'm just going to use a little bit more of the red. And I'm just going to lightly sketch in some of that veining on these poinsettia leaves. And I'm just using very small, trying to do very light pressure with my liner. And I'm starting at the middle there and drawing away from it. Some areas will be more shadowed, and so they're going to be thicker areas. And then we'll even go over slightly darker to do the actual veining. And we might even want to use some of that muted red where we add in some of the green to mute it a little. For now, I'm just getting just some darker areas on each of these leaves to add a bit of detail. Actually, if you don't get too much paint on your brush, you can keep it a little bit more finer detailed than before, if you tap it off a good bit. Some of these are like much darker than others, and you can kind of adjust how they go. Don't want to go straight necessarily. You can curve them a bit so that it gives the idea that the leaf is, that the petal is folding a bit. But there's that. This other one's going to be just a bit trickier only because the leaves that are done are in the back. We want to be careful not to pull on these other ones too much, but we can still do the same thing here, adding some veins and shadows all along those. And you can see, I don't know if you can see on your thing, I can see a little bit of the line from there. So even as dark as this one is, you can see a little bit of those leaves underneath. And so if that is happening with yours too, just know that that is completely normal. And that's why we did both options, so we can see what we prefer, what works best for us. And just, it's good to experiment a bit and see. You don't know how something's going to work for you until you try it. And it helps, then it can help you figure out, you know what, I prefer this, it looks better more often, or I prefer that. And then that's just the way you typically paint those things when you come to those different sections there. I am going to give this a little more time. I think most of these are mostly dry, but I want to make sure. And I know some of these still, like this one I can tell is still wet. Definitely has, it has the sheen to it, so that's definitely still wet. The other ones are more dry, but they're still a little wet. So I'm going to give those just a little bit more time to dry. If we want, we can go ahead and try to add in some of our yellow in the middle there, if we can do it without touching the red, especially if it's still wet. So here's my Quinacridone Gold, which is a nice bright yellow. I also really like this Mission Gold Raw Umber is another one if you want a more neutral yellow. They're very similar, but this one's kind of almost a hint more brown. And it's just personal preference, really. And this one I have a lot more space, so I think I can add in some of those yellow areas without worrying about it spreading too much. On that other one, I might want to wait a little bit longer. Just doing a few little dots of yellow in there. And yeah, I'm going to wait a bit, because if I touch this one, the yellow is going to bleed into my red, and then that leaf will be a little bit orange. My dots will be gone, and it'll be a mess. So I'm gonna wait just a tiny bit longer before I come over here. And actually on this one, it is mostly dry, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and start doing the green leaves on this one before we even do anything, the veining or anything on that one. And we haven't done the veining on the other leaves yet. We'll do those after we're sure they're dry. But so for this one, we're gonna do the leaves in the same style that we did these petals. And so we're gonna start kind of behind them and add them in. A lot of the times the leaves of the poinsettia look very similar to the petals. They're just a little bit wider and green, obviously. And a poinsettia usually has the nice dark green leaves. That's why I'm using the Perylene green. But you can change your color palette up a little bit. You can use the undersea green to have more of an olivey green. You could make it a more vibrant, bright green. I think typically as long as you have the colors and shapes right, the basic colors, they can be variations. But I'm going to use this Perylene green because I like it. And we are just going to pick, and you don't have leaves. On the poinsettia, you cannot always see the leaves all around it. So we're not going to have a leaf everywhere behind every single petal. We're going to plop them in a few spots. And actually here we have one that comes out here. We'll wiggle a bit. And then it comes around. And you can see a little bit of it on the side there. And so I'm going to fill this in just like we did with the leaves when we did it using the fine liner. And these leaves will have veining on them as well, which we will do after it has dried. While it's still wet, you can add little bits, and actually we could have done this with the red too, and I didn't think to do it, but you can add darker bits, like grab a little bit more paint and just add little dark areas of your leaf. That's a good way to create just some natural shadows. Just put them especially close to where the leaf is, and maybe some out here at the stem or tip. And it'll spread out however it's going to go. Okay, and so now gotta figure out where else we want to put a leaf. We're gonna skip a few spaces here. Okay, we'll come over here, and there's like a part of a leaf over here. You can't see all of it. And I am looking at a picture just to get a basic idea because I don't want to overdo it with the leaves or the petals. And so having a reference photo just to get the general shape is helpful. But it's not necessary. Okay. And then there's a little leaf, let's see, over here maybe. And remember I said I'm actually gonna put another red leaf here, so I'm not gonna put a leaf there. Did I say red leaf? A red petal. One day I'll figure this out. And this leaf is going off to the side there. I'm dropping in just some darker color in between the petals there. And then I will put a tiny bit more, tiny hint of a leaf here. Okay. And that's it for my leaves on that specific one. While we're still working on everything else, I am going to go ahead and go back in and add that petal that I almost forgot that I wanted to add because it's not touching anything that's wet. Okay. There we go. And now we'll let that dry as well. And actually, I'm kind of going to extend it a little bit more. There we go. Okay. Now we can come back over here. Most of these are dry. That leaf is, or that petal is still a little wet, so I think I'm going to do that one last as far as veining. And then we can try to do some leaves on this one as well. This one did get quite dark in, like when I painted it. I'm going to add a tiny bit of the Perylene green over here to my red just to get a better shadow for my line on those darker ones. Oh yeah, that looks better for a shadow and veining. And I'm just pulling very lightly from there. I'm gonna skip that one right next to it, like I said, and I'm gonna come over to here. And I'm just gonna keep going around. I draw the center vein and then I pull some smaller veins from the side off of it. I do like the color of these veins. I will say though that I think right now of the two, my favorite is this one, just because these leaves are just very dark compared to the other ones. And so I think I'm going to end up having to darken these leaves for it to make sense. Which just tells me in this situation I prefer this style. I prefer to paint the leaves and then paint the ones behind it rather than trying to paint over, which is something that I typically do when I paint. I don't paint like on top of the other petals as much. I do tend to paint behind more in this style here. And yeah, that one's still wet. So I'm gonna add in a few of the veins on these ones. Very careful not to hit that, the green that is wet. And this is another way when I'm painting, I typically bounce around to what is available, what is the best thing to do at the moment. I don't paint all my leaves, all my stems, everything at once. I paint whatever is the easiest that I can get to without making a mess. If something's wet and I have to wait, I find something else to do while I'm waiting. Even if that sometimes means working on a completely different project. I do that frequently, actually. That one's still pretty damp. And I don't want my veins to spread out too much. So I'm going to pause there and I'm going to do some leaves. I'm just not going to do a leaf on this side, I think. I think I'm going to do them on other areas so that I'm avoiding that wet petal. So I'm going to come over here, I think, and do here. It's a little wet there for some reason. Okay. I'm going to come over here. Let's see. We'll do another bit of a leaf peeking out here. And maybe we'll go up here, just a tiny bit of one. Behind those petals. And maybe even down here. I think we'll do one here. I'll just have it go around that petal there. Very carefully. Okay. Now, all right, something we can do with our leaves is just to darken up some of the areas that do have shadows, like this one. This leaf is behind these, and so right near where the leaves sit would be a little more shadowed. This one is behind these, so it would also have a little bit of shadow along the edges there. And just in general, it would probably be a bit darker. So all of these, we just want to add like a little darker area, especially along the edges that are closest to it. Because if those leaves are sitting on top of those, it's definitely going to be darker underneath there. Okay. And we can always go over the top of this a little bit with some more veins if we cover and lose our veins a bit. But I think that already that popped those other leaves up front a bit more. There is, remember we did those tiny leaves on the, or those tiny petals on the top. We want to probably shadow a little bit underneath them just to make those pop a bit more. It's a bit tricky because those leaves actually got really, really dark, and so it's kind of hard to get them in there just right. I'm going to go ahead and add the veins over here on this one. I think it's hopefully dry enough. It's not as dry as I would like it to be. That one definitely got quite wet. We also can go ahead and grab some yellow. Oops. I got way dark. Might even use the Quin Gold on this one. And try to plop it in there without touching the red too much. It's a little bit tricky, but there we go. And this one we did that brownish yellow, the raw umber, but I'm adding a tiny bit of the Quinacridone Gold too. Okay, and really we can call these good. If we want, we could add a few more details, but overall this gives the gist. You know that it's a poinsettia, it's a leaf. We could darken up these petals on this side if you wanted to, because they're very, very dark compared to the other ones, and actually because they're behind, they should be darker, not lighter than the ones up front. So you could do another layer on top of those and see if that helps. But then that again has us going in back over where we just painted over. And so now we're basically doing the same process we did on the other one. And so I think in general it works better to paint the background petals after the front petals. It just is an easier way to do it with more control. If you paint the other ones on top, you really don't have any control in how those petals are going to turn out. Okay, so that darkened that up a little bit. I think it helps. We lost some of the veining, so when that's dry, we would need to go back in and add some veining. We can also add veining on the leaves if we want, the same way as we did the other ones. We'll do that dark middle line and then some lines out from there. But for the purposes of this video, I think this is a good place to stop. And so I will see you guys tomorrow for day 12. No, this was day 12. Day 13. All right. Thank you guys. I hope you had fun. I would love to see what you created. If you feel like sharing it with me, either here or you can share it on my Instagram. Wherever you're most comfortable. I would love to see what you guys make. And I will see you tomorrow for day 13. Bye, y'all.